and welcome to Pod Like a Pro. This is a podcast that helps you podcast like the professionals, where we share some tips, tricks, and talk to podcasters who are in the industry doing it themselves. I'm Liz Clarkson from Pod and Pen Productions. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the storytelling traditions of the Awabakal people, whose lands I am standing on as we record this podcast. Now, have you ever heard anyone say, gee, the podcasting landscape has changed? I'm betting that you probably have, but just how has it changed? And what do you need to know if you're planning to launch a podcast in 2025? I can't actually believe I'm saying 2025. It feels like the future, and yet it is here. To help me through this unknown territory is the wonderful Lyndal Harris. Lyndal Harris is a podcast mentor and launch strategist. She's been on the podcasting scene since 2015, so that is almost 10 years ago now. Oh my goodness, Lyndal, welcome.
Thanks, Liz. It's great to be here.
Can you believe 10 years?
No, I can't. I really can't. I even still pinch myself going, how is that the case? How is that?
Yeah, and here we are. So tell me, I mean, obviously things have changed a lot since 2015, but what are the things that, when you look back, how do you think it has changed in your experience?
Well, it's definitely the volume of podcasts. That's definitely goes without saying. I was trying to find the actual stat that I'd recorded somewhere back in 2016, and I'm sure it was around 270,000 podcasts on the Apple Podcast app. I certainly have found it in 2019 in March. I was telling people that there were 525,000. And of course, now in the podcasting index, there's 4.2 million podcasts. So it has absolutely exploded. And we know that a lot of that happened in COVID. A lot of people launched their podcast. But it's very different too, because you have the different apps. So when I started, it was very much around Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher was around, and there were a few different apps. But now there's a lot more, and obviously Spotify have come into the game. YouTube are here. You've got Amazon Podcasts and a whole lot of other directories as well. And the third thing that I've noticed is a lot more networks, podcast networks are around now, which makes the podcasting landscape very different.
I'm interested to hear how you think the networks make it different, I guess, this podcast that we're making here is predominantly for, say, small business owners, people who are trying to do it themselves. How does the network influence the smaller podcaster, the independent podcaster?
I think I work predominantly with small business owners as well for their podcasting as part of their marketing strategy. But there was certainly a lot less podcasts around. And I know that when you have some of the bigger podcasting networks were around then, absolutely. But quite often they're up in the charts quite a lot. It's hard to get some movement up into the charts and stay up there because they already do have that audience. And so when they've got different production budgets, obviously, they can spend their time and their money researching, where there's a gap in their podcasting age groups and things like that, or what they can then go and produce to fill that gap. And as I mentioned, the budget is very different to the independent podcaster.
It really is. And I think you do hear the difference, but also I'm somebody who will listen to both types of podcasts from all sorts of different people. And I think underneath all of it is the storytelling and the education and the entertainment. And if we've got that right, regardless of whether you're doing it, on a shoestring or if you've got this full production company, that's the bit that's going to cut through, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. It's not to say that you can't have a successful podcast if you're not on a network at all, but it's just the difference, I guess. But as you say, if you do it well, and we were saying before, that cross section of education and entertainment through the storytelling is such a good way to get your message out there, particularly if you are a small business owner and you're wanting to connect with an audience in a different way.
Now, we are at that funny time of the year where we're turning from the old and going to the new, as a lot of people do with around this New Year's sort of period. And I wonder what you would say to people who do have that launch a podcast on their to-do list for 2025. What do they need to think about to make sure that they're going out there successfully?
I think that you really need to nail down that strategy first. I know that we say that a lot. I know you talk about it as well, is really understanding your strategy of why you're launching a podcast and understanding that it's not too late to launch a podcast. A lot of people wonder if, 4.2 million in the index, there's so many podcasts out there already, but it's not too late to launch a podcast. I think if you start with your strategy and also know what success is for you. So it might not be that you want to get into the top 10 in the charts. And so that's and not find a new audience as such. And it might be that you want to touch base with your audience, or you want to share your frequently asked questions or educate people around what you do in your business. And really understanding your strategy and then what success is for you will set you up to launch well, rather than just launching and sort of putting it out there and hoping that it's successful, because that's where people do find it tiring and they'll get pod fade, because they'll put a few out there, or they'll put 7 or 8 out there, and then they stop producing podcasts. And that's, if you've got a message to share, that's really heartbreaking to see people stop after so few.
I think you're so right there, because if you're clear on why you're doing it and what success looks like for you, then you can actually look for those success measures that perhaps are not so much about the numbers, but are more about getting that message across. Because if you don't really have that why set up to begin with, you're probably almost not knowing what success looks like. So okay, we'll go with the numbers, because that's the one thing that we can actually track. And if that's not looking great, which most podcasts, let's be honest, most podcasts when they first launch, they're not going to have a huge amount of followings unless they're with a network, as you were saying, that already has a huge following, or they've got some sort of, community group or organization that already has a huge following. It's really hard. You're sort of starting from the ground up again. So the numbers is not the best way to look at success, but there's a whole bunch of other ways you can gauge that success.
Absolutely. And I think if you go into it thinking it is a lot harder to find a new audience by just launching a podcast. And if you talk to somebody who launched pre-COVID, they possibly did find a new audience because there was so less podcasts around then. I don't know if I said that right then, but there were so few around compared to now that you could find an audience. So some people were lucky enough to launch in a time when you'd get in the top 5, some would get to number 1, and they would sit in those charts for a fair time, and they'd be featured by some of the directories. And so they were able to find an audience. Now that's very different now. And I'm not suggesting that you can't find an audience, but you need to understand that just launching a podcast without a real strategy around how you're going to grow that will be very difficult these days. So thinking about it in terms of if you're launching a podcast for your business, then, put it into your marketing in different ways as well. If someone does a discovery call with you, send them to your podcast so that they can get to hear your experience and your knowledge, and they can get to know you. Putting it into your nurture sequence and things like that, and really thinking of different ways to promote it is a really good way to set that strategy, rather than just, I'm going to launch a podcast and find a new audience through Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
And given that there is so many now, and I think you're right, we've got so much room for growth in podcasting, because nobody ever says, oh, we've got too many books, everyone should stop writing books now. But probably what people would say is, don't bother writing a book unless it's going to be quality. And I think that there is a bit of that out there now for podcasting. It's almost don't bother unless you're going to do it with a bit of quality, and you don't have to do that straight away. You can learn, but you need to have the intention that this is something I'm going to work at and really make this something that I'm quite proud of. That's I think probably really important in 2025. Yes. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. And audio quality. I'm still surprised how many people don't necessarily even just buy a microphone. Yeah. It's, audio quality is probably the number one reason people will tune out of a podcast if you don't respect your listeners' time enough to give them a really good quality audio experience, as well as the content, of course, as well. But yeah, the audio quality content, really thinking about your whole podcast and the listener's experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if you're not willing to spend $100, $150 on a microphone, you've got to think about how committed are you to this podcasting experience? Yes. Similarly, though, don't go out and buy thousands of dollars worth of equipment.
Yes.
You don't need that.
I totally agree with you. That is not my advice either. It's just start small. And even if you really have no budget, can you use the microphone in the headset that comes with your phone, but do something that's going to get a good quality audio where there's not wind blowing into your microphone and you just sound, it might be fixable in editing, it might not, but really thinking about, as I say, that listener's experience is important.
Absolutely. The one thing I know about editing is that it's so much easier to just go into it with a good sound than trying to fix it at the end, because it's actually very difficult. And I think sound engineers do a wonderful job of making it look like it's simple. Same with good production. It sounds so smooth because it's been produced so well. But it's not as easy as it sounds.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's really is important to get the best quality recording that you can, not with the thought of I'll fix it in editing, because sometimes you just can't. That's the other thing I've learned over the years. I know many years ago I had a very strange audio. I don't even know what happened to the microphone, the way that it took the audio in, except because I'm not I don't have a big, strong audio background myself, but I do know that it wasn't right. I could hear from the fact that it wasn't right. And we couldn't fix it. I went and took it to about 3 sound engineers that were very experienced, and they could not fix it. And so unfortunately it was a case of put it out as it was or re-record the whole episode. So it is really important to get that good quality at the recording stage.
Absolutely. Well, Lyndal, it's been wonderful to talk to you about all of the good things about podcasting that have been and the wonderful things that are coming up in the new year. Do you have any predictions for what we're going to see in the world of podcasting over the next year?
I think we'll see more live podcasting calls, people calling in and doing the live recordings. And I wonder if we might see some more events, like live recording events from podcast hosts as well. But I think that it's certainly not slowing down. And as you mentioned before, people don't say there are too many books. I think it's 7 million YouTube videos are published every day. And there aren't even 7 million podcasts around. There's 4.2 million podcasts. And just to break that down a little more, only about 11% of those have published in the last 3 months. So you do have evergreen content, and of course you have the series style podcasts, but on an ongoing publishing schedule, there is opportunity there to produce a really good podcast and make it successful for you.
Yeah, so I think the key message there is, if you do have podcasting on your to-do list for 2025, this is the universe telling you, do it.
Absolutely.
Lyndal, thank you so much. It's always a joy to talk to you.
You too, Liz.
That is Lyndal Harris. Lyndal Harris is a podcast mentor and launch strategist, and I'll link to her website in the show notes. And if you're interested in finding out more about launching a podcast in 2025, then you can also check out our website, podandpen.com.au. Until next time, happy listening.